Excellent, it is. Okay, excellent. Thanks again, everybody, for turning up today. It's going to be really interesting afternoon. Well, I found it interesting. There's lollies on the table, there's sugar on the table, because we're going to go long today because I found this thoroughly fascinating. All right, so let's get into it. Do you want a little cheat sheet? We're going to be dealing with I think it's pages 3 and 4. You'll see where we are. A little bit of a different order than what's in your booklets there. I'm going to be starting from, I guess, the smallest things in design that we can see that God has created. And then we're going to be working out all the way up, literally, to the Earth and the solar system. Okay. Before we get into anything, I thought it might be really important for me just to lay down a few ground rules. Okay, so most of you know who I am, and maybe for those who may want to listen to this at some future point in time, my name's Tim. Just for the purpose of this afternoon, I'm a Bible student, and I grew up in a Christian household, and I was taught the ways of God from a baby. So just so you know where I sit in this thing, I'm assuming that if you're at a church, you're understanding that where we're going to go, but that's just a little idea. Now, me personally, I'm not formally educated in science. I'm an earth mover at the moment, which means I literally dig dirt all day long. So not a whole lot of intelligence there, not related to any of the other fields. And as such, some of the information that you hear this afternoon might be a little simplistic, but that's just what it is. But still, I found it, even at this simplest stage, I still found it rather interesting. Now, as you can probably be very well aware, being that I'm a Bible student, I'm certainly a proponent of creation or intelligent design. Now, where do I sit in either of those two fields? Well, I don't really mind which one somebody uses, but for me personally, I'm a creationist. I believe that God is the force behind the wonderful design that we see within ourselves and we see in all of nature around us. Some in the intelligent design community just believe it's a force, and they don't really give a player or a purpose to that force. I don't believe that. I believe God is the designer. Just so you're all aware where I sit. Also, being that we're talking about God's design and intelligent design, this isn't going to be some sort of equal, grounded, okay, so here's what evolution says, this is what design says, make up your mind. I'm so far in the camp of intelligent design and creation. I sit well there, so it's going to be leaning one way. Oh, yeah, that's sort of in the way there, isn't it? Anyway, I can explain that for you. Even though, as I've said, it's going to be rather simple, I want to thank Shari or whoever put the program together for putting me on this, because it's been fascinating. And as I say, we're going to go a little long today. Now, this is just my personal preference. I don't actually have an issue with the term evolution or the word evolution. I think that things definitely do change and adapt, and dare I say, evolve. Now, it's just the issue that I have with evolution is the world view of evolution, that there's common ancestry, that we came from amino acids, that through mutation and genetic variety, we get to where we are. That's what I have a problem with. But the actual word evolution, got no issue with that at all. Also, should any of you that I don't know sit firmly in the evolutionary camp and we wanted to debate each other, I'm in a lot of trouble, because, as I say, I've only got a very base level knowledge of a lot of what we're talking about. And if there was some sort of evolutionary biologist here, they would stamp me in the ground, because they would know far more than I would. And in that, just to be very clear, creation and intelligent design is not a scientific theory. We need to know this as well. As I look out in the crowd, a lot of us are creationists. We need to know this, that it's not a scientific theory. Evolution is a scientific theory, and it is backed up by the science out there. Now, in saying that, I don't also have a real problem with this, because if it wasn't for the work of scientists who believe in evolution, we then wouldn't be able to see the wonders of creation that we have now, which we, attain to a creator and to an intelligent agent behind that. So it's just a few little things. Okay, so the booklets you've got in front of you, Shari's put together. Thanks, Shari, for doing that. A lot of this information has been taken off that top slide. You can see there the design watch. Adam went through that a few weeks ago. Andrew went through that a couple of weeks ago. So a lot of this has been taken from that website. However, there are a few other ones, and I would definitely recommend that people, if you really want some good hard science to back up your intelligent design thoughts, have a look at some of these. A lot of these interlink with each other and they play with each other really, really well. But have a look at a lot of these websites, because they're fantastic. If you want a good scientific backing to what you're talking about, these are the people. And if I can, off the top of my head, Stephen C. Meyer, William Dubensky, scientists in their own right, but believe that there is intelligence behind everything that we see. So really interesting stuff. Okay, just maybe a little bit more groundwork. These are the sort of the major points that we're going to see when we're talking about evolution and creation. So on the evolution side of things, you've got things like common ancestry, natural selection, genetic variation, mutation, gene flow, genetic drift, and non-random mating. There's some of the terms that you might hear when you're talking about evolution. You know what? We don't even need that list on the other side. For me personally, I'll just replace all of that with one word: God. That's what I believe is the ultimate designer, the thing at the end, the one that knows everything, the one that's created everything. That's good enough for me. But if you want to go down a bit of an intelligent design route, there's intelligent cause, there's design, there's purpose, there's fine-tuning, there's information theory, there's specified complexity, and there's also something that you might hear quite a bit is irreducible complexity. So there's some of the terms that you might get thrown around. Okay, so let's start talking. As I said, we're going in a little bit of a backwards order to what might be in the book. I think the Goldilocks planet was the first one. We're going to talk about junk. Now, unfortunately, my daughter and my son aren't here. They're over in the Sunday school doing something, and I was going to make some joke about their room and stuff like that. Forget that. Okay. So, because there's mutation, that there's billions of years to get to where we are now, they believe that there's a whole lot of stuff that just isn't necessary. And it may seem like that if just on a casual review of things, but as I say, and as I'm going to keep saying, there is purpose and there is design in everything. So what we're going to do, we're going to look now at 3 examples of some vestigial appendages. You might have heard that. And then we're going to look at the example of junk DNA, and we'll get to that in a second. So what are we going to start with? The appendix. Anybody here had their appendix removed? We've got 1, 2, 3, got a few. My daughter had her appendix removed. It was actually really interesting when it happened, because it ruptured inside of her abdomen, and the body encased it in like a gelatin sort of sac. And they weren't actually sure when they did the CT scans of what had actually happened. And I was thinking, well, just send us home. So glad we did it, because eventually, obviously, that sac's going to, it's going to dissipate, float around in the abdomen. But yeah, it wasn't until they actually couldn't see it. It wasn't until they went in for surgery and they're like, okay, we see what's happened. And then after the surgery, she actually got quite a lot of pain related to that surgery because of what they had to do to clear it all out and everything like that. She's fine now, though. It's totally fine. And I'm sure everybody, hey, the appendix just blows up. What's the point of having an appendix? Well, let me tell you, there's a whole heap of points of having an appendix. Google. Everybody knows Google. There's now the AI, I guess, summary that comes up with Google. I chose the appendix to be the first one because it's sort of one of those ones that in the past we've seen, it's vestigial, it's useless, it blows up, it's hopeless, we don't need the appendix. It's coming around. Forget the first couple of sentences, just so we can try and push through some of this. While traditionally considered a vestigial organ with no known function, recent research suggests it may play a role in immune system and gut health. So science is now coming around to the idea that this thing that was considered quite useless really does have a function. Evolutionary claims. Darwinian scientists have claimed the appendix is a vestige of our herbivorous ancestry. I am going to mess up some words this afternoon, so get used to that. And over eons of evolution, its function in humans has been diminished or lost. But it's now known that the appendix performs important functions such as providing a storehouse for beneficial bacteria, producing white blood cells, and playing important roles during fetal development. In light of the advance, Duke University immunologist William Parker observed that many biology texts today, still refer to the appendix as a vestigial organ, even though they know all this stuff. But it's time to correct those textbooks. Let's just go a little bit further into what the appendix does. And we've sort of mentioned a few of these. The appendix is involved primarily in immune functions. It's functioning as a lymphoid organ, assisting with the maturation of B lymphocytes, and that's a variety of white blood cells, and in the production of a class of antibodies known as immunoglobulin A or antibodies, helping with the production of molecules that helps to direct the movement of lymphocytes to various other locations in the body, and suppressing potentially destructive hormonal, blood and lymph-borne antibody responses that promote local immunity. I didn't write any of that. Just so you know, I didn't write any of that. Don't know what a lot of that means, but it's got a purpose, doesn't it? So, is the appendix needed? Well, I think it is. People without an appendix, though, individuals without an appendix were 4 times more likely to have a reoccurrence of
Clostridium difficile.
Thank you. I wish I'd done that on a few more because there's some killer words coming up. Now, that's a bacterium that can cause severe diarrhea and colitis. Now, this is the interesting thing. Reoccurrence in individuals with their appendix intact, so they've still got their appendix, is in 11% of cases. Reoccurrence in individuals without their appendix occurred in 48% of cases. So it's not that you're going to die. Plenty of people have had their appendix removed, but there is a function to an appendix. It's not a vestigial organ. Okay. It's a great photo, isn't it? Oh, it's a great image. So we're not going to be talking about the eye because I'm pretty sure the eye is dealt with later on in this series. Yes, it is. And Robin's at the back. You touch my eye, I'm going to come after you. Hopefully, you're not dealing with this one. So we're going to be talking about the, can I say that? The plica semilunaris. That's the plica semilunaris. Now, why am I taking my glasses off? The plica semilunaris. Does anybody want to find it? So you've got that little red part just on the side of your eye. This is actually quite hard to see. Nobody's going to see it out there. And I think if you look over to the left, there's going to be like a, no, it's not on that one. It's on the next image. There's kind of like a very clear sort of semi-lunaris. It looks like a semi sort of half circle, sort of half the moon sort of thing. Just like a little flap of tissue just on the inside. I chose this one because I'd never heard anything about this. Now, what do evolutionary scientists claim? Well, they claim that particularly the nictitating membrane, I believe that's how you say that. So what's this membrane? Well, up there you can see there's top left, there's an eagle, there's an owl, there's a shark, and I'm pretty sure that's a lizard. I think that's a lizard or a crocodile. I'm not 100% sure. One of the other. It's a lizard. It's a lizard. Let's go, or frog, one of the other. It's essentially anybody who's seen those wildlife documentaries where you've got the shark bears its teeth, rolls its head right back. You see all the teeth and everything, and then sometimes you'll see that the shark looks like it's got a white eye. That's this membrane coming across to shield the shark's eye and to shield from danger, essentially. The eagle, because they're diving pretty hard down to get their prey, probably the same with the owl, they can use this membrane to come across and probably helps with out drying the eye out, protects the eye. So if there's any bugs or anything, but they can still keep their eye on their prey without needing to close their eyes and just dive randomly down. Okay, so as we said before, yeah, so there's the Plica semilunaris. It's a little bit hard to see, but you've got that red part, and then there's a little part that's probably a little bit exposed because I was looking at my wife's eye this morning and I couldn't really see the Plica, I'll be honest. So the idea, it's a leftover and holdover of evolution, as can be seen in plenty of animals. And as we said, it's that membrane. So without a doubt, it's not as important as something like the retina or the cornea or the optic nerve. I'm not stepping on your stuff, Robin, it's okay. But it still does serve a really important purpose. And this is from Dr. Alan B. Richards, a clinical assistant professor at LSU Health Services Center. He says, when performing surgery for esotropia, I don't know how you say that, essentially cross eyes, one must be very careful with the plica semilunaris. The tissue can easily be improperly attached too far temporally. I explained to the residents that the plica is needed to allow the eye to move outward or temporally, and sewing the plica in the wrong direction can not only result in a dreadful red appearance of the eye, but the eye can be drawn inwards. So the surgery to correct the cross eyes can actually make it worse if the surgeon doesn't do the surgery right. That's for all very well and good, but what exactly does it do? I'm not going to read any of that because there's 100 words in there that I can't pronounce. However, basically, if you want to really quickly read through it, basically what that document is telling us is that the plica is involved with eye movement. When we move our eyes around, it's there to sort of house and help the eye stay in a central location and not move too far temporally or out of the way. So it has a purpose. It has a purpose. It's not a holdover of evolution. Classic one, isn't it? The coccyx or the tailbone. Okay, so what about the coccyx or the tailbone? Evolutionary claims. Happened to be around about 25 million years ago. This is what evolutionists say. We still have a coccyx as an evolutionary hangover from this tail-bearing ancestry. Tailbones helped our ancestors with mobility and balance, but the tail began disappearing around 20 million years ago. Wouldn't be great for pants, but I would love to have a tail. The coccyx now serves no purpose in humans. Coccyx doesn't serve a purpose in humans, guys. What's it there for? Our ancestors who had mutations that got rid of the tail seemed to fare far better, and thus our tails went away over many generations. I don't know. I reckon I could find a purpose for a tail. It's got no usefulness. No. We know how this is going. I'm going to back this up. So the usefulness of the coccyx. Despite its small size, the coccyx has several important functions. Along with being the insertion site for multiple muscles, ligaments, and tendons, it also serves as one leg of the tripod, along with the... Dave, you're going to help me out on this one. What was that word again? We did this earlier. Come on, buddy. I know the second one's tuberosis or something, or... you can read it, but I'm not even going to try. So what we're talking about there, I really need a pointer here, don't I? What we're talking about there is when they're talking about the one leg of the tripod, you've got the coccyx, then you've got those other two bones that are down beside the coccyx. That's what they're talking about when they talk about the tripod. That provides weight-bearing support to a person in the seated position. So it has a purpose. All right. Let's move on to junk DNA. How are we going for time? Ooh, 20 minutes in, and we're only this far. Still the first one, guys. Okay. Junk DNA. Okay, DNA, for those who aren't aware, is essentially the information and the building blocks of every single cell, apart from red blood cells and also, I think, sperm, I believe. Apart from those two, DNA is involved in every single cell in your body. Now, I've got a little, in simple terms, DNA is like an instruction manual for building and operation of living things, or a living thing. It contains all the genetic information needed to determine traits and functions passed down from parents to offspring. Think of it as the blueprint for life inside nearly every cell of an organism. And this is a deep, deep, deep well hole. Imagine if we had a book on DNA. That's all I'm going to be doing today. I'm not even opening the cover because this is so intense and so deep. I don't understand most of it, but we've got enough to hopefully maybe disprove a little bit of junk DNA. Okay, so the junk DNA issue came from the Human Genome Project, which was a 13-year international project that was completed in around about 2003. And it was in an effort to map the entire human genome. And they succeeded. They did it. They were able to map all the chromosomes and all the genome and all the DNA in the human body. They found from their findings that only 2% of the human genome was coded for proteins. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Essentially genes. So basically only 2% of that was genes, and the rest is just junk. And why is it junk? Because we've got a whole bunch of common ancestry and all of that junk has been pulled along with us. I don't know what they're talking about. Maybe that's the case. This is what some of the evolutionary claims are. Brown University evolutionary biologist Kenneth Miller argues that the human genome is littered with pseudogenes, junk fragments, orphan genes, junk DNA, and so many repeated copies of pointless DNA sequences that it cannot be attributed to anything that resembles intelligent design. Richard Dawkins, who's heard of that guy? Yeah, a lot of us have probably heard of that guy. He's I like the guy. I don't think he'd like me because I'm a creationist. He really doesn't hold a lot with creationists. But anyway, Richard Dawkins, likewise, evolutionist, obviously, writes that creationists might spend some earnest time speculating on why the creator should bother to litter the genomes with untranslated pseudogenes and junk tandem repeat DNA. So it's some pretty cutting words. Like they're just like, man, we only need 2% of this. The rest of it's just garbage. Unless one is willing, this is Francis Collins in the book, The Language of God, unless one is willing to take the position that God has placed shared, functionless, repetitive DNA in these precise positions to confuse and mislead us, the conclusion of the common ancestry for humans and mice is virtually inescapable. They were doing an experiment with mice, obviously, in this one. It's sealed, isn't it? It's all junk. As I was talking about, let's just dust off the cover of that book for a second. If you're anything like me, I had no real idea what was going on. So inside the cell of every single one of us, inside every single cell, there's a nucleus. Inside that nucleus is where the DNA is kept. Now that's kept in chromosomes, and we have 46 of those in total, 23 pairs. One is related to our sex organs, so either XX or XY. Within those chromosomes is the DNA, and then segments of that DNA makes up the gene, and that tells the cell what that cell is. So whether that cell is going to be a hair cell or a heart cell or a skin cell, whatever it might be, that's what the gene is telling that particular cell to do. Think of it like this. The book is like the entire genome. The chapters are the chromosomes. The sentences are like the genes, and then the individual letters are the DNA, the actual DNA themselves. So just a little bit more, as I said, 46 chromosomes, 220,000 genes, and 3 billion individual DNA letters. Right. Okay. I found this really interesting, and I actually don't know how it's possible. If all of the DNA so this is one single human cell were laid end to end, it would stretch about 2 meters. It's not that long, is it? A grain of sand is around about 500 micrometers in diameter. If you were to take the cell nucleus out of those cells and line them up so you all know how big a grain of sand is, you would get 80 of those cell nucleuses across the top of 1 grain of sand. Now, put this into another perspective. If you were to take the DNA out of every single cell in your body, if you're able to attach it together, it'd run from here to the moon and back 6,000 times. I have no idea how that fits in a, that's incredible. Admittedly, that last slide, it's 2 meters long. How does 2 meters get into such a small area? That is an absolutely remarkable feat. Okay, let's talk about what creationists and proponents of intelligent design say. Biologist Richard Sternberg and geneticist James Shapiro said, one day we will think of what used to be called junk DNA as critical components of truly expert cellular control regimes. In September of 2012, and this is something that he talks about quite a bit, was the ENCODE project. Now, the ENCODE project was a project started by around about, I think it was 412 or something like that, scientists, and they studied the areas of the non-functioning DNA, this junk DNA. And they came up with some pretty amazing findings. The data that they found enabled us to assign biochemical functions for at least 80% of the genome. So remember, only 2% of it was useful. They're saying about 80% of it was useful, in particular outside of the well-studied coded proteins. So they weren't looking into those genes. They were looking into the big stretches of DNA that are just a wasteland. They only looked at 147 different cell types. And their conclusion was that 80% would probably go up to about 100%. So what did they find? Well, they found in these big stretches of non-encoding DNA that there was areas that repair DNA, assist DNA in replication, transcripting, adding and folding and maintenance of chromosomes, controlling RNA editing, helping to fight disease, regulating embryological development. They found a whole bunch of functions in this, what was considered junk DNA. Once again, Richard Steinberg, same scientists, in I think this was a publication or an article, maybe in the New York Academy of Sciences. He said, the selfless junk DNA narrative and allied frameworks must join the other icons of neo-Darwinist evolutionary theory that, despite their variance with empirical evidence, nevertheless persist in literature. So he's just saying, hey, look, this junk DNA, it's useful. It has a use. Now, as I say, I don't really fully understand all of this, but there are so many reasons why we have these stretches between genes. Yeah, it's really, really incredible. And I would urge you to study this for yourself, to look into this for yourself. We finished. We got through the first one. The first one, guys. We got through the first one. Guess what? We've got 3 more. Everybody, take a deep breath with me now. Feels good, doesn't it? Feels really good for me because I'm so nervous. Okay. What did we just do there? We did so much. We did so much. Okay. A little bit of a history lesson. We're going to get back to this. I don't want to talk on this too much. But in our atmosphere, we've got a whole bunch of oxygen and a whole bunch of nitrogen. Nitrogen really needed for the flora of the world, and oxygen absolutely needed for us. So in that big deep breath that we took, that's just a really cool picture I found on the internet. There's a whole bunch of areas that we want to talk about this afternoon. I want you to consider 4. So the pharynx. Now, that's sort of located, well, see it there. You can see where the pharynx is located, and it's essentially a shared pathway for both the respiratory system and the digestive system. We also want to talk about the larynx, which houses the voice box, and is also the conduit down into the trachea, which leads into our lungs. We want to talk about the esophagus, which is essentially the muscular tube that propels food and liquids down from the pharynx down into our stomachs. And then we also want to talk about the trachea, which, as I said, is underneath. So it's part of the larynx, underneath the voice box, and then that becomes the trachea, which flows down into the lungs. And that is where our air goes. So air doesn't go into our esophagus, obviously. Our food doesn't go into our trachea. They're 2 very separate parts. Now, I'm going to come back to that. It's one system. So this is just one system that houses, at minimum, 3 separate systems. So we're able to take in food, we're able to take in air, and we're also able to talk. Three vital systems. The first two, without them, we die. And I know some people don't have the power of speech, but still a very important communication process. Let's go a little further. Let's stay on the trachea side of things. Okay, you've got the bronchiole, the bronchioles, the alveoli, and the capillaries. Oh, yeah, I had some little arrows. So we take a deep breath in, goes down into the trachea, goes down into the bronchiole, into the bronchioles, then down into some little sacs called the alveoli. And then around those alveoli, there are a whole bunch of balls. And the reason why your lungs expand, because, hey, keep your phone on top. No, you're right. No, a reason why your lungs actually expand is because those alveoli, they also expand. And then there's a whole bunch of very tiny capillaries on the outside of the alveoli that do the transfer of O2 into the bloodstream, oxygen into the bloodstream. So just a few little things, the bronchioles, some of them are around about as thin as a human hair. There's just around about 30,000 of them in each lung. The alveoli, as I said, is covered in capillaries. Now, these capillary walls are very, 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 very fine. They're only around about 1 cell thick. And this is what allows oxygen atoms to pass into our blood. Now, once again, this is very, very, very confusing and very technical. We're not really touching the main points on this, but very briefly, there's a protein in red blood cells called hemoglobin. And in that hemoglobin, there's an iron particle in that, and the oxygen atoms bind to the iron particle. So we take a big, deep breath in, all the oxygen goes into our lungs. Essentially, what is happening is there's a force going on. There's a whole bunch of carbon dioxide that wants to get out of the lungs. There's a whole bunch of oxygen that wants to get into the lungs, and they press themselves through this barrier, this capillary barrier, so that we could breathe out, we could get rid of the poison, which is the CO2, which we can't survive on, and we also take in the oxygen, which goes to the rest of our cells. There's around about 600 million of these alveoli. Spread them all out, there's enough to cover a tennis court. Doesn't finish there. One of my favorite words that I found in this, the medulla oblongata. Didn't think I was going to be able to say that, did you? It's a part of the brain, particularly I think it's in the brain stem, which controls autonomic functions such as breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and various reflexes. So we have two types of functions. We have autonomic functions, and we also have somatic functions. Now, somatic function, that's a somatic function. Guess what else is a somatic function? You know why it's a somatic function? Because we can have control of it, but it's also an autonomic function in that you're all aware that you're breathing now, aren't you? In that we breathe without needing to be told that we breathe. So your heart beating is an autonomic function, but the things that you control are somatic functions. Now, the medulla oblongata, it monitors the amount of CO2 in the bloodstream. Now, the CO2 in the bloodstream, it increases the acidity in the bloodstream. And I believe this is what they're talking about when they talk about lactic acid for athletes and people who do a lot of sports and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of chemical receptors in the bloodstream that detect the acidity within the blood. And so what happens? As you're exercising, you breathe harder, you breathe deeper, you breathe faster to get rid of that CO2 and to bring in more oxygen to rejuvenate those cells. Guess what? It still doesn't It doesn't end there. The lungs also produce a really critical substance called surfactant, I think it is. And that essentially just reduces surface tension on the alveoli when you're breathing. And it essentially just stops the alveoli from collapsing and obviously makes it a lot easier to inhale and exhale. There's a whole bunch of mucus that's also produced. So if you've got pollens or something in your lungs, something that's not meant to be there, infection, I'm sure a lot of you have been sick and coughed up something that looks pretty gnarly. That's the whole purpose of that mucus. Obviously, we also know that for those who have, explorers that have gone up into, Mount Everest or K2 or something like that, the atmosphere obviously up at that height is not conducive to people surviving. So what does the body do? It tries to breathe heavier, tries to breathe harder. it realizes there's not enough oxygen there. So what does it start to do? The body shuts down, and non-vital organs and parts of the body are the only ones that are saved. Things like the heart and the brain. I think that's amazing. We're still not finished. We're still not finished. We've dealt with the respiratory system. Let's just move over to the digestive system for a second. Is there a problem with the digestive system? A better designed system would have kept the tubes for air and food separate to avoid unnecessary fatalities. If we were designed, why did the designer do the job so badly? Or is it that the creator likes other animals better? These are creatures in which the air passages and food passages are entirely separate. The whale's respiratory system is separate from the digestive system. We know that's got a blowhole on the top. This means that the whale, unlike humans, can't choke on its food by inhaling it. If the creator could do that for the whales, I don't know why he couldn't do that for us. And that's from Abby Hafer, and in her book, you can read it up there. So it's saying, hey, look, this is a bad system. It's been badly designed. What happens when we take a bite of food? Well, we all know what happens. We take a bite of food and it forms the technical term is a bolus, right? So the bolus, the tongue, goes into the mouth, forms a bolus, you chew it up, you make a small ball of food. Tongue voluntarily moves to the pharynx. So remember, the pharynx was the pathway of both the respiratory and the digestive system. And it triggers an automatic reflex to swallow. You definitely have all felt that because you've swallowed something in your life, but you really would have felt this if you've ever gone to the dentist and there's too much water. It's like, dental nurse, get this tube further down there. I'm choking on this water that you're sending down there. So you can't help it. You have to swallow. It's an automatic reflex. You have to swallow. The pharynx sends sensory information to the swallow center. That is actually what it's called in the brainstem, which immediately turns off respiration. So we don't choke. You cannot breathe and swallow at the same time. Several muscles contract to move the bolus to the pharynx. The back of the palate and the upper pharynx close together to close off the path to the nose. That's so you don't get food coming out of the top. 3 separate actions then take place to protect the airway, and this is where it gets interesting. Okay, muscles contract to close the larynx, which is the gateway to the lungs, as we've spoken about. Larynx, voice box, trachea. Other muscles move the larynx up and forward. Everybody do a little swallow. You'll actually feel this. You'll feel the larynx move up and underneath the floor of the mouth and the base of the tongue while being protected by the epiglottis, which is that essentially muscle flap of skin which closes off to direct food down into the stomach while protecting the trachea from any food going into it. This action, combined with other muscular activity, opens the upper esophagus to allow the bolus to enter. And guess what? If something does go down the wrong one, because that does happen every now and again, we cough. We get it out of the trachea. We get it out so it can go down the right pipe. Now, I know, some people do choke and things like that, but there is also a mechanism just in case something goes wrong. I found this quote, sorry, I didn't write it down. The timing and coordination are remarkable. The swallow center must send the right signals via the right nerves to the right muscles with the exact right split-second timing. About a second, yeah? Yep. Since all of this is triggered by the bolus entering the pharynx, the signals from the throat to the brainstem and back to the many muscles involved with their reaction times must be fast enough to prevent choking. That's amazing. That sounds like design to me. I don't know. What do you do if you want to try and separate all of these things? We need air as part of our voice box, and we need a mouth and a jaw and lips to create phonemes to be able to create words. If you're going to separate these things, where do you put the trachea so it can go into your lung? Where do you keep? I don't know. To me, it looks designed. All right, we're getting there. We're on number 3. We're going to talk about giraffes now. Why are we talking about giraffes? I told you we're going from small to big. 2 biologists. The giraffe's long neck is a prime example of evolution's handiwork. There's no denying this. Now, I love this example. This is great. I made a survey of all, this is a pretty lengthy one. I made a survey of all major high school textbooks in biology. Everyone, every single one, no exceptions, used the same example to illustrate Darwinian set superiority, the giraffe's neck. Giraffes, we are told, got long necks in order to browse the leaves at the top of the acacia trees, available to no other animal. Now I love this. If we continue to illustrate our conviction of Darwinian evolution with an indefensible, unsupported, entirely speculative, and basically rather silly story, then we are clothing a thing of beauty in rags, and we should be ashamed. If we choose a weak, foolish speculation as a primary textbook illustration, then we are in for trouble. And that is from Stephen Jay Gould. He's in those books, a professor of paleontology and zoology at Harvard. And guess what? The guy is an evolutionary biologist. He believes in evolution, but he's just like, how dare you use the giraffe as an example of evolution at work? He goes on, even if we assume that the giraffe's neck let me start again. Even if we assume that the giraffe's neck evolved as an adaptation for eating high leaves, how could natural selection build such a structure by gradual increments? After all, the long neck must be associated with long legs to accentuate the effect and a variety of supporting structures, bones, muscles, and ligaments to hold up the neck. How could natural selection simultaneously alter necks, legs, joints, muscles, and blood flow? Think of the pressure needed to pump blood from the giraffe's brain. And that's what we're going to talk about. Let's get up and close with this giraffe. The heart, it's about 2.5 meters from the brain, and it weighs about 11.5 kilograms. Now, it creates a really, really high blood pressure within a giraffe. It's around about 2.5 times that of a human. And normally in larger animals, the heartbeat is a little slower. In the giraffe, it's actually quite high. It's up there with what a human's heartbeat is. So the question is, what happens when the head is lowered? The high blood pressure that a giraffe, undergoes, really, it should blow the giraffe's head off. Like it should be fatal to the giraffe. However, there's a whole bunch of small blood vessels called I'm going to get this wrong, the reta mirabile, I think. Essentially, it's called the wonderful net. And now all these blood vessels are located at the base of the brain, and they help regulate this blood pressure as the giraffe puts its head down. So they expand and they store a whole heap of extra blood because this blood pressure doesn't stop. They store a whole bunch of extra blood in these valves and vessels. Sorry, that's what the word I was looking for. These blood vessels, and they reduce that excess blood pressure going into the brain. Then, obviously, as the giraffe raises its head, they release it, goes back down the neck and back into the body. They also have a whole bunch of specialized valves, and also their blood vessels do actually constrict a little bit in the neck to also help with this blood pressure issue. And because the legs are below the heart, they're susceptible to the same issues of high blood pressure. So they've essentially got what one person thought that it's very similar to a G suit that a pilot wears in one of those fighter jets or something like that, or the elastic support stockings. They're bound really, really heavily around the giraffe's legs to control that blood pressure going into the giraffe's legs. The trachea itself, about 2.3 meters long, and about at its maximum, about 51 millimeters wide. So it's fairly wide. The giraffe can hold up to about 55 liters of air. So it's about 8 times more than a human. This is what's really interesting. The breathing rate of a giraffe is a lot lower, so it doesn't get windburn. Yeah. It also, because this breathing rate is lower, it allows it to be able to expel all of the CO2 that it needs to get out of its body and then bring in some more O2. So I found that rather interesting. Giraffes are ruminants, very similar to cows. They regurgitate their food. They've got a bunch of muscles similar to us as humans. We don't need to regurgitate our food, obviously, but it pushes the food down and also pushes it back up. And this was really interesting. Giraffes' front legs are 10% longer. So that allows them to shift their center of gravity so they don't fall forward. Yeah, really, really impressive. Looks to me like there's a bunch of design going on in there. Ken Ham, you might have heard of Ken Ham. Ken Ham, he's a Christian fundamentalist, young earth creationist, Christian apologist. He's also a film and science teacher. He lives over in the United States. And I think that says something like, how many giraffes blew apart their head or something like that when bending down? How many passed out as they lifted up their heads, becoming food for the lions? Until the special features somehow evolved. It's obvious that the very first giraffes had these special features right from the beginning. If not, they wouldn't have survived to pass them on to their offspring, which makes a lot of sense to me. They would have been. We're almost there. We're on number 4. We're on number 4, right at the end. The Goldilocks planet. Okay, so they're in your books as well. I think that was the first one or something like that. Yeah, sorry, I got there eventually. Okay, so so the Goldilocks planet, right? What are we talking about when we're talking about the Goldilocks planet? You all know the nursery rhyme. Yeah, that's right. Too hot, too cold. You know, this girl comes in. I think bears should probably take legal action on Goldilocks. She's coming into their house without, but anyway, no, too hot, too cold, too hard, too soft. You know, she's always whinging about something. What does she want? She wants something that's just right. And that is what we're talking about with the Goldilocks planet. We're talking about our planet, and the zone that we live in is just right for Earth. Now, this one isn't going to be quite as, we're just going to spring through some of these. So the Goldilocks zone, or the Goldilocks planet, or what scientists mostly call the habitable zone. So the habitable zone is a region around a star where the conditions could potentially be suitable for life on a planet. Clearly, that's the case on Earth because we all are here and we're all alive. One of the greatest indicators that a planet is in a Goldilocks zone is the presence of liquid water. If you are too close to a star, the liquid water will burn off. If you're too far from a star, the liquid water will freeze and you cannot use it. We are in just the right place. Also, the water on this planet, because there is so much of it, kind of acts like a little bit of a air conditioner. It takes a long time for a big body of water to heat up and to cool. So sort of thermoregulating the temperature of the planet. And if you can think of like deserts, think of the vast differences between night and day in a desert. Okay, so just a few more facts. Earth's atmosphere. We talked about it earlier, 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, other trace gases and things like that. Very quickly, if you ever want to dive into this is a little bit of a sidebar, but nitrogen is so vital for plant life. And Fritz Haber, who was simultaneously awarded the Nobel Peace Prize and was also in trouble for war crimes during World War I, figured out the Haber method, I think, which is a way of pulling nitrogen out of the atmosphere and combining it with ammonia, I believe. And it's essentially the reason why we have large-scale farming and agriculture today is because of that one man. But he was also convicted of some war crimes because he came up with Zyklon gas B, I think, which was used in extermination camps in Nazi, I believe. It wasn't him that came up with it. The Zyklon class A gas had a smell to it, and he was able to track that smell somehow. Look into it. It's a fascinating story about this man. But so yes, oxygen we need, nitrogen plants need. Wow, that's what we've got on the Earth, isn't it? The magnetosphere. Bunch of flowing iron around the Earth's core creates the magnetosphere. Protects us from harmful solar and cosmic radiation. Without it, we would be fried by the sun because it's not just heat that the sun's emitting. Obviously, it's a whole bunch of UV light and really, really harmful radiation. Without that magnetosphere, we're toast. Little bit about the ozone layer. UVA gets all the way through the ozone. Responsible for a little bit of aging. UVB, that's the one we've got to be quite careful of. Not too much sun. A little bit is good for you, obviously, but not too much. That's the ones that is also responsible for aging of skin cells, but also cancer if there's too much. And UVC, which I'm really glad doesn't get through because I'm I'm pretty sure they artificially can create UVC in water filtration systems. Dave might know. Yeah, Dave's straight up. I'm getting a nod from Dave. That's excellent. Yeah. So yeah, I've even seen it on some houses. You've got your classic carbon filters or whatever, and then it also will run through a UV filter. And I'm pretty sure it's that UVC, but could be wrong. Feel free to correct me after. Jupiter. We've spoken about the Earth. Now our solar system, we live in this habitable zone. Jupiter's our good old big buddy, and he's sitting out there. He's 3.5 times the size of Earth. He's protecting us from essentially life-ending catastrophic asteroid hits because of the mass. Obviously, size equals mass. Yeah. So in 1994, the comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 crashed into Jupiter and was swallowed up. Computer simulations suggest that these sort of collisions would be thousands of times more frequent on Earth if Jupiter did not exist, or if it was much smaller or further away. So our big brother's sitting out there protecting us from a whole bunch of stuff that comes in from our solar system. Okay, this was just something about Earth's orbit. Basically, we're in an orbit, obviously, around the sun. It's just saying that basically, if we were only off by, so our orbit is 1/10 of a percent. If it was only, what they're basically saying is that you do this, and then if you extend that out over miles and miles and miles, that doesn't become a small amount. That becomes a massive amount. So they're saying just a small amount of a percentage, we freeze to death or we're incinerated. So we're in this really perfect orbit around the sun, just in the right place, perfect place. Just a few more quotes. We're almost there, guys. Sorry. The University of Washington, Stanford University, NASA, and the University of Idaho. Just a few more quotes here. Earth has a big moon to stabilize our axis wobble, recycles life-friendly carbon over time, various surfaces to support a whole bunch of varied life forms. We're situated far enough away from gas giants. So while Jupiter protects us, if we're too close to it, there's going to be a whole bunch of dramas there. So it's also in the perfect position. Our sun is a stable, long-lasting star, which is really important for life. Our sun offers also protection from galactic debris, very similar to Jupiter, throwing it off in a different direction or putting it into an orbit, but away from us. We are also, this is really interesting, we are also, whilst in our solar system, we're in the perfect habitable zone, in the Milky Way galaxy, we're also in this perfect habitable zone because we're steered clear of a whole bunch of other asteroidal hazards. And yeah, okay, essentially, if we were closer in on the Milky Way galaxy, there's the potential that we would be smashing into other solar systems, other stars and everything. But we just happen to be in this nice part of the overall galaxy where we're sort of situated on the edge, where we get to avoid a lot of the chaos that's happening in the middle. I found that rather interesting. Few more quotes. Earth is well equipped as a planet and ideally placed in our solar system and galaxy to support a review of habitable zones for animals as well as other microbes and in the galaxy and universe as well as around the sun leads us to the inescapable conclusion Earth is a rare place indeed. Now, I personally don't think that Earth is the only place in our entire universe that could support life, but it's pretty impressive. It is pretty impressive. This is the last slide. But before I read that, design in action. That's a cup I made some 28 years ago when I was a sheet metal worker. It's terrible. Don't even look at it. The inside of it is, I can't actually use it as a cup because the weld is porous. So bacteria would be in there. But in that cup, there is design in progress. I needed to cut the blanks out, I needed to do the TIG welding, I needed to grind it up to a polished surface, I needed to very badly solder the handle on. But in that, there is design. It's a bit of a bad example, but I'm hoping what you're understanding from this afternoon is that I truly do believe that design and an intelligent agent is behind us and everything that we see. So, science will tell you that intelligent design is a matter of faith. I've got to be honest, I think it's really a matter of faith for both of us. And I'm not afraid to say it is a matter of faith. In fact, we're instructed in the scriptures that it is a matter of faith, that we do need to believe God without seeing him. But none of us were there at the start. So none of us actually know how all this started. So for science, it's also a matter of faith. I want to conclude with these final words, and this is God speaking. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So we may not understand why things have been designed the way that they are, but I believe that there's a purpose for it. Okay, so that's the end of everything I wanted to say today. If there's any questions or anything, maybe you can just come up to me afterwards. If you don't agree with something, that's totally fine. Feel free to challenge me on anything that I've said. What I might do though is just ask Brother John to close in a word of